The UK is in a deep mess, and nothing illustrates this more than the recent landslide election result. The Conservatives have been in power for 14 years, yet in this election, only 23% of the UK voted to keep them in, allowing Labour to form a huge government majority. This is the worst result in the entire Conservative Party's history going back hundreds of years. Something must have gone horribly wrong for the public to be this opposed to them. When David Cameron took charge in 2010, the UK was still deep in its recovery from the financial crisis of 2008. However, they were in a fantastic position globally. They had one of the highest GDP per capita rankings in the world, surpassing even the United States. The average person was richer here than in almost every other country. Cameron initiated his first sweeping policy changes in the hopes that this Tory government would be remembered as one of the best performing in history. But over the next 14 years, the country stagnated in most areas and even regressed in others. We will look at 5 key reasons why the British public have lost faith in the Conservative Party. Let's start with the overriding problem: an utter lack of economic progress. GDP has barely budged since 2007. That's hardly any growth for 17 whole years. Living standards remain the same as they were prior to the Great Recession. This is reflected in the complete stagnation in real wages during this period. So, when adjusted for inflation, the average person is earning the exact amount they were when Tony Blair was Prime Minister. In the meantime, other powerful nations have surged ahead in almost every area. Paris has overtaken London as the largest financial hub in Europe. The US is now utterly dominant in world trade. The pound recently fell to its lowest ever level of $1, having been worth $2 in 2008. Investors are simply not confident in the UK economy. But what exactly has caused this country to become such a stagnant mess? Yes, you could look at external events and shocks, such as COVID, the Ukraine war, and its resulting inflation as potential factors, but a huge portion of the world face these same challenges. I want to focus on the decisions and policies that the Conservative Party made themselves, decisions that ultimately came to the detriment of every single person in the country. First, we have to go back to the very start of this 14-year rule. David Cameron's big policy was to dramatically reduce spending, shrinking the size of government, therefore lowering debt and the spending deficit. This policy was known as austerity. The central theory was that too much debt dampens economic growth and raises the risk of a debt default. However, the US has continued to increase its debt in order to meet spending targets, and they've done so relatively cost-free due to record low interest rates. It has never been so cheap to borrow money, so this should have been the solution for keeping public spending at stable levels, preventing key services from entering disarray. But the Tories did the opposite. The effects of austerity were devastating for the entire country. Every single public service had their funding and investment slashed. Investment into the NHS was cut over a 4-year period, leading to the steep decline in the quality of UK healthcare. We now see many hospitals in terrible conditions, with roofs collapsing and overworked, underpaid nurses. Junior doctors have been on extended strikes due to their pay consistently lagging behind inflation, with many simply leaving to other countries that pay better. Many high-profile cases of preventable deaths have been reported in the news, caused solely by the decline in the NHS. It is estimated that A&E delays cause more than 250 needless deaths every single week. Welfare is now 7.5% lower, inflation adjusted, than 15 years ago, leading to an explosion in poverty for society's most vulnerable. In 2010, 60,000 people used food banks. That number is now 3 million. The justice system too was destroyed with cuts. There were 143,000 police officers in 2010. This was cut by 20,000. 244 courts were shut, creating a huge backlog of cases. Tens of thousands of cases are currently on delay and will be for the next 2 to 3 years. I could go on, but did austerity even manage to achieve its one clear objective, to reduce public debt? In 2010, debt was approximately 70% of GDP. That is the lowest it has been ever since. Debt has now climbed to £2.5 trillion, exactly 100% of total GDP. You could point to COVID stimulus spending as a big contributor to this, but even before then, this policy was simply not working. It couldn't even solve the single issue it aimed to fix at the expense of every other area. The defence, education, health, justice, welfare and social care sectors were all devastated devastated by austerity, and of course there's one more sector: housing. The housing market has become so utterly broken under the Conservatives that it deserves its own section. To put it simply, increases in house prices have far outstripped that of wages, making it immensely difficult for working people to buy one. The cause of said price increases is simple supply and demand. This graph shows the number of houses built over the past 80 years or so. It peaked following the war, consisting largely of council houses built by the government. Thatcher effectively ended this practice in the 80s, putting the responsibility solely on private companies. This shrunk the overall supply of housing. The first 4 years of Cameron's austerity resulted in slashed council budgets, resulting in the lowest number of houses built in recorded UK history. During this period, house prices have skyrocketed. In 1971, the average house price was £4,200. Now it is £281,000. But that doesn't tell the full story. Let's now show the housing affordability ratio since Tory rule. This is basically the ratio of the average house price to average earnings. The ratio has increased over the years, indicating lower affordability. There's quite a clear correlation here. Nowhere near enough houses are being built, so supply is low. Demand remains high as the population continues to increase, inflating the value of housing in general, thereby reducing affordability. It is now near impossible for first-time buyers to get onto the property ladder without an extremely well-paying job. Obviously, young people are disproportionately affected by this. Those growing up in low-income families without financial help have to work many more years than their parents did before being able to afford a home. As a result, more and more young people are living with their parents instead of in a couple with children. Unfortunately, the depressing reality is that owning a home is now merely a distant dream. Housing is one of the biggest reasons why inequality has gone out of control. Rising prices allows those with expensive assets to increase their net worth, making it easier for them to acquire new assets, which continues the loop of gaining wealth. Those with zero assets, on the other hand, become priced out. The rich use their riches to get richer, while the poor lose the ability to compete in the first place. Home ownership for 25 to 34-year-olds collapsed from 59% in 1996 to 28% today. But inequality is not limited to housing. 30% of the population, including 4 million children, live in relative poverty. 300,000 are homeless. Most of the UK's destitution is outside of London, partly because the most valuable assets and therefore billionaires are located within the capital. This long-standing regional inequality has only worsened with time and has essentially created a failing nation according to statistics, with only an incredibly rich London propping the rest of the country up in worldwide rankings. Wealth per person is £200,000 higher in the southeast than the north. Life expectancy is 3 years higher in London than the rest of England. Although this trend has been decades long, the Conservatives have done nothing but exacerbate it. Austerity disproportionately affected those poorer northern towns. Former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak publicly bragged about taking government funds away from deprived areas and funneling them more towards the well-off constituencies, where voters were more likely to vote Tory.
To make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
This tells you all you need to know about the last 14 years of Conservative rule. The final and perhaps most embarrassing failure for the Tories was immigration. A huge debate emerged around immigration during the Blair Labour government as numbers shot up, particularly from Eastern European countries. The Conservatives promised to tackle excessive immigration in their manifesto. Many disgruntled Labour voters turned to Conservative as a result. This graph shows net migration to the UK during Conservative power. Following COVID and the reopening of the country, they completely lost control of the border. Every single day, hundreds of young refugees cross the English Channel from France, straining every underfunded public service further. The Tories came up with multiple failed policies, including storing migrants in barges and flying them away to Rwanda. This cost taxpayers £500 million, but was immediately scrapped by Labour after years of prolonged planning and zero action. Brexit was another proposed solution to shoring up the border. Leaving the EU meant that EU citizens could no longer freely move to the UK as they wished. Although this essentially eliminated Eastern European immigration, it did nothing to stop the influx of those arriving on small boats. Most Conservative voters also voted Leave for the border issue alone. As well as being failed on that front, Brexit has created awful economic side effects. For example, the loss of investment and trade with the EU has been dire. The UK has had the worst performing economy in all of the advanced G7 economies since leaving. Of course, the long-term effects of Brexit are yet to be realised, but thankfully they will not be seen under Conservative leadership. No matter what political side you lean towards, there can be no doubt by anybody that the Conservative Party deserved its fate. It failed in almost every metric, even in areas they are usually known to perform well at, such as immigration. We haven't even gotten into the multiple leadership changes, Trussonomics, and countless scandals which plagued their reputation. It will go down as one of the worst performing governments in UK history, and has left the Labour Party with one of the worst ever economic inheritances. But can Labour fix this? They were not voted in for their incredible campaign and policy proposals. In fact, they look likely to continue many of the same policies. The public voted for this outcome due to pure hatred towards the Tories. That is their legacy of failure. Thank you for watching.